Hello there YouTubers, Mobtech is back with a new tutorial video, and this time we're going to give you an extensive walkthrough how to read and count Elispot plates using an AID Elispot reader. But before we move into the reader room, we are in this short introduction going to present to you how we have decided to structure this rather lengthy but important educational video. In essence, this entire tutorial will be based upon the 3 Elispot plates in front of you, all based on the pre-coded plate format and developed in accordance with the Mobtech protocol. To the right, 2 interferon gamma plates, one white and one clear. Both have been sampled with the same donor PBMC and incubated using identical experimental layouts. With the help of these 2 plates, we will later on show you in a step-by-step manner how to optimize the AID camera, calibrate the stage, and adjust count settings. But before all that, we are actually going to start off this tutorial by analyzing the other plate on the left. This is an IL2 Elispot that has been done previously here at Mobtech by the QC department, and will herein serve as an early demonstration of how a well-configured AID reader can do wonders in optimizing your workflow. So, with all our 3 plates at hand, we now move into the reader room, turn on the reader and load the IL2 QC plate into the machine. Before we continue, I just want to point out one very important detail about the startup process. Always begin by first turning on the reader and then launching the software from within the PC environment. If you do it the other way around, the AID reader will simply not work properly. At this stage of the tutorial, our viewpoint magically changes and we sort of move into the software itself. That is, we are now looking at the screen connected to the reader. You are seeing everything I'm doing inside of the AID software. See how the mouse is moving? That is me moving the mouse. In order for you to fully appreciate all the details within this software, please make sure that you are watching the high definition version of this clip within the YouTube player. 1080p in combination with full screen mode is recommended. So with the IL2 plate firmly loaded in place and with our pre-configured profile automatically engaged at startup, I first right-click on the C4 box and select Move to C4 from the pop-up menu that appears. The reader immediately acknowledges my command and moves to C4. I then bring up the live camera view by clicking on the small little camera button located up here. The spots and membrane looks fine as judged by the live image of the C4 well. I then just click on the green arrow button and the reader is off to work, reading and counting the entire Elispot plate according to my profile settings. Overall, what really impresses me about the AID reader is the speed and user-friendliness of its operation once everything is properly set up. Getting there can be a bit challenging, but once you have it in place, it is easy Elispot reading from there on end. As you can see, the reader moves from well to well at a threatening pace, displaying the acquired wells and spot numbers at the instant that the camera system and counting algorithm is done. The live camera window can be closed down, although I myself tend to enjoy having it there as the reading experience becomes more interesting as compared to the default plate view. We have now analyzed around 50% of this plate, and I could take a few moments to just explain the basic experimental layout. Anti-CD3 stimulation has been used in the majority of the wells at a cellular concentration of 50,000 ppmcs per well. You can see the exact position of these wells in the graphical overlay. The exceptions to this can be found in the upper left corner, where we instead have triplicates of no cells, cells plus medium, CEF peptide pool, PPD, and finally PHA. Out of these wells, the cells plus medium, the CEF peptide pool, and PPD have been incubated at a cellular concentration of 250,000 ppmcs per well. By contrast, the darker PHA wells only received 50,000. Overall, the quality of the IL2 spots are exceptional, as always with pre-coded plates. Once the final well has been read and counted, we save the plate by going up here to File and selecting Save As. We write in a suitable name and press Enter. In a matter of seconds, the save is complete. We are now essentially done. However, before we go back to our office desk, we should also export the data using the clever Open in Excel function. There you go. Here are all the spot numbers presented neatly inside the small little Excel sheet. With the help of this file, I can now go back to my office computer, process my data and finalize my graphs without occupying the reader. In about 2 minutes total, we have read, counted and exported an entire 96 well Elispot plate. This is how Elispot reading should work, always. Let's minimize the Excel file and close this plate down. No worries, it is safely saved on the hard drive. If not, the software would have prompted us with a warning. By pressing the eject button, the IL2 QC plate is ejected and we instead load the white Intron Gamma plate into the machine. Here is a small tip on the side. Remember to put the plate cover back on your ELISpot plate once you are done. This protects it from dust and hair getting down into the wells and messing with your spot counts. We want to minimize the work of manually having to remove artifacts from within the software. Okay, by exiting the software, this tutorial now changes tone and direction as signified by the change in background music. We have all seen how a well-configured AID reader can be fantastic in operation, but now we have restarted it and erased everything. Terrible settings have purposely been put in place. It is now time to get serious in fundamentally understanding the AID software from the ground up and go into more detail on how to configure everything from the camera, to the stage, to the focus, to the count settings. There will be moments of repetition where we describe things that have already been explained before, but if you have stayed for this long, I guess you're real dedicated and don't mind hearing it again. So, how do we go about this process? Well, we start off by going through some basic principles of the AID software. In general, the program is very similar in structure to that of Microsoft Word. In the top left corner, drop-down menus gives you access to all aspects of the software. Just below these, you have the graphical shortcuts to many of the most important features. The main window below is called the plate view, as indicated by the 96-box layout. Here is where the ELISpot wells will line up in real time during analysis, just as you saw earlier. The plate view boxes can be selected using the mouse left click button. By dragging the mouse, we can select several boxes in a row. We can then right-click on the selected area and get a pop-up menu with a number of options: read and count selection, only read, delete selection. Deleting refers to situations where the selected boxes actually contain analyzed wells. Right now, it won't do anything. It is also possible to right-click directly on an unselected well. The pop-up menu that appears then is different from the one we saw earlier when the well was already selected. Here, the Move To function is something I use very often. We can also go here to the Selection drop-down menu and choose Select All. All boxes now get marked or selected as indicated by the blue-purple color. Using the mouse, we can now deselect a particular well, in this case C4. We can finally go up and choose Select Clear from the drop-up menu to get back to a normal and unselected plate view. Let's continue in our understanding of the AID software by accessing the Important Options menu. This is the inner heart of the software where you configure the basic settings of the machine. Any AID user should be familiar with this area. The Options menu can be reached in two different ways, either using the Tools drop-down menu or through the graphical shortcut located a little bit to the right. Once inside, we are greeted by an options tree to the left where you have to press the small little plus signs in order to access all available subheadings. In this tutorial, we will only touch upon a few of these settings, the ones that are perhaps most essential when it comes to reading ELISpot. The others we will leave in default. We strongly advise you to check out the AID manual for more detailed explanation on what all the other options actually do. Okay, first in order, we have software mode. Here you're given the choice of putting the reader into either safe mode, research mode or diagnostic mode. These options will result in different levels of security, meaning that some settings or all settings are not adjustable by the operating user. As you can see, at Mavtech we have our reader in research mode, meaning that we are free to adjust almost any setting that we want in terms of configuration. If your reader is not in research mode, you will have difficulties following all steps of this tutorial. Below software mode we have data acquisition. Here under the general subheader you control the reading pattern of the machine. That is, whether the machine should read wells horizontally or vertically. Under camera initialization parameters, you have three options for the camera resolution mode: maximum resolution, fluorescence optimized, and enzymatic optimized. These options will generate images of different pixel densities, and for ELISpot we recommend enzymatic optimized. Although maximum resolution might sound tempting, the benefit for ELISpot is in our experience marginal. Changing to maximum resolution will fundamentally change the parameters of the counting algorithm since it is resolution dependent. Consequently, all count settings later on in this tutorial will only apply if you also select enzymatic optimized here in the general subheader. Time base alters the exposure settings of the camera and should not be changed. Please leave it in default. The advanced reading parameters should be left unchecked. Continuing downwards, we come to the Optics tab. Here is where you control the filter settings of the machine. Right now it is in one image reading mode with the LED lamp as the indicated active filter, thus suitable for ELISpot reading. For our two interphone gamma plates, these settings are as they should be. By contrast, in the case of reading fluorospot, a switch to 2-image reading mode would here be necessary, including selecting the order at which the fluorescent filters should be utilized by the machine while reading. We will discuss these aspects further in a future fluorospot tutorial. Let's switch it back to the ELISpot setting for now and let's continue forward. 2 steps below optics we have the AOI Autocenter tab. The AOI abbreviation stands for Area of Interest, meaning the marked area of a well that is actually included by the software's algorithm when counting spots. We will later on observe the AOI as a dotted circle in well view once we start double clicking and looking at the ELISpot wells in detail. I will point it out once we see it. Anyways, the adjustable settings in this tab controls the thresholds given to the reader in trying to correctly place the AOI within the borders of the ELISpot well. As you can see, the Autocenter function is currently trying to do this by finding any ring-shaped structure. These settings should be left in default. If somebody has tampered with them, the center of the ELISpot wells can be missed by the camera system, and you should click on the factory reset button found here. Under Data View, we have a number of options that can be adjusted in regards to the information seen on the screen. For example, under the well subheader, you control which data is presented to the user when double-clicking and reaching a well view. On this page, we also find 2 small little tick boxes that controls hiding the area outside of the AOI and image anti-aliasing. What the AOI tick box essentially controls is whether or not the image outside of the AOI should be artificially removed or not by the software. I usually leave this tick box unchecked as I like to see the inner wall reflections when looking at my ELISpot wells in detail. It gives me a sense of presence and orientation that I like to have when analyzing my plates. The anti-aliasing tick box can have dramatic effects on some older AID readers where leaving it unchecked can result in a very pixelated image. However, for the more modern AID spectrum model used in this tutorial, it does little to influence the visual appearance. Nonetheless, you should try both options and see what looks best with your particular reader. Okay, let's continue downwards. It's good to be familiar with the data export settings. Located here under the Excel tab, you control the output once you engage the smart Open in Excel function. Do we want only spot numbers to be exported, or should something else also be included? This is what you control in this section. Finally, under File Input Output, File I/O, you configure whether to save your ELISpot reading images as either TIFF, JPEG or bitmaps. JPEG is the default, and we recommend this setting since TIFF will take up more disk space with virtually no benefit in image quality. A setting of 95 or 98 really does not matter. Okay, that is all for now with the options menu. Let's move on. As a newcomer to the AID software, it is important to understand the definition of a user. See the information right at the top of the screen where it says user and Symantec? That means that we are currently logged in under this particular username and that any changes made will only affect this particular profile. At Mabtech, everyone has set up their own individual user accounts. In that way, configurations are kept independent and no one will affect each other's settings when it comes to options, camera control or count settings. This tutorial recommends that your laboratory organize yourself in a similar manner. So, how do we go about creating a new user from scratch? First, we start off by clicking on the shortcut button called Manage ELISpot Users. We are here presented to a list of all users currently found on the machine. The ones seen in this video are the ones that comes pre-installed by AID. The first 3 user profiles in the list are all configured for reading fluorospot plates and will not be further discussed in this tutorial. The 4th user, called AID, is reserved for service operations, and Symantec is the recommended profile for ELISpot reading. Masterlot is used for quality control. For more on this, check out the AID manual. For this tutorial, we are not going to log into any of these pre-installed profiles. Instead, we are going to begin fresh by setting up our new independent profile. To do this, we shift our attention to the right where we see a number of clickable buttons, including the descriptive one called Create New User. Let's click on that. First, we set the preferred name of this new user and lock the profile from access by other people by putting in a secure password. The software then asks us which existing user to copy the base settings from. For our new user named Mabtech ELISpot, only ELISpot plates will be read, and it is therefore suitable to base this profile off settings and configurations that are found within the pre-installed Symantec profile put in by AID. Let's go ahead and do that. Despite creating a new user, we are still not yet logged in. In order to achieve that, we have to access our user by first selecting it from the list and clicking on the login button. We are prompted to write in our password and then hit OK. There you go, we are now logged in correctly and can confirm this by making sure that the username of our new profile is found at the top of the screen, right above the drop-down menus. Right now, this new profile is identical in configuration and setup to that of the Enzymatic user profile. Any changes that we make from now on will stay unique to Mobtech Illispot. We are now about to take our first steps together in optimizing the settings for this newly created user. What do we do first? Well, whenever I put in a new plate into an AID reader, I always want to do a so-called reference check, meaning that I check out a single well just to make sure that everything looks fine. Has the assay been successful? Do the spots look like they should? Are my count settings an area of interest where I expect them to be? The single well I choose to look at should preferably contain some spots in order for me to judge things like camera settings, focus, and so on. Consequently, we start off with a reference check for this new profile by first reading and counting well C5. Why C5? Well, in this well, 250,000 PBMCs were incubated with the CEF peptide pool. From looking at the plate, I know we had some good looking spots in there. After selecting the well, we right-click and select Read and Count Selection from the pop-up menu. After doing this, the stage moves the plate into position so that the well C5 can be captured by the camera system. The image is processed by the reader and a counting algorithm performs its task of counting all the spots inside of the well. The process of doing this is almost instantaneous and will show up in real time here in the default plate view. As you can see, the reader is already done and has detected 125 spots in the C5 well, which are presented in the lower left corner of the C5 box. We can double-click on C5 to gain access to the so-called well view. Here, a larger image of the counted well is shown together with the circular AOI indicating the area of interest, that is, the selected area of the well that has actually been counted by the software. Inside the AOI, spots are counted according to the current count settings. The counted spots can be indicated by the software by clicking on the yellow cross button up here. To the right, we have the important count settings. We will return to this section later on in this tutorial. From doing this initial reference check of the C5 well and looking at it in detail from within well view, we quickly realize that the image looks far from what we saw in the beginning of this tutorial for the IL2 QC plate. In essence, the image looks terrible. Here are the main issues. Number 1. The image is way too bright. Spots are bleached out. The contours of the well are difficult to see. The camera settings will have to be adjusted. Number 2. The AOI is not correctly positioned on top of the well. That is, the stage calibration of the machine will have to be adjusted. And number 3. Spots are a little bit fuzzy, indicating that the focus of the camera system is not correctly set. All of these factors will have to be fixed before our user profile has been properly configured for good Illispot analysis. Let's start with the camera settings. We access the camera settings by leaving the well view of C5 and clicking on the shortcut button called Change Camera Settings. As always, this function can also be accessed by using the Tools drop-down menu. By clicking on this shortcut button, two new windows pops up. One is the live camera view and the other is camera settings. I usually just pull the camera settings window to the side before making any adjustments. To better our camera settings, we start off by adjusting the shutter, or also called exposure. Just lowering it down from 1205 to 483 dramatically improves the Illispot image. We are now able to see the contours of the well and the contrast between spots and membrane are much more reasonable. Changing the brightness setting only provides small alterations to the camera image. Likewise, sharpness is not particularly dramatic. In contrast, the white balance R and white balance B sliders will significantly change the image composition. A poor setting here can seriously mess up your spot numbers. I like to settle for something where the colors are not too extreme. This usually lands in the upper right echelon of the slider for both the R and B setting, in this case 429 and 456 respectively. Hue does little to change the image, but saturation is very important. I personally prefer a membrane that has a slight purple tint to it. I really don't know why. Okay, there you go. Now I'm pretty happy with my Illispot colors. To save my adjusted camera settings, I click on the Save button and the window closes. If I forget to click Save, the settings will be reverted to the previous state. Let's see what these adjustments in camera settings has done to the number of spots detected. I again right-click on the selected C5 well and select Read and Count. Before it was 125 spots, now the machine is able to count 137 spots. In addition, we are now able to see the circular well within the C5 box from the default plate view, a good indication that contrast settings are now appropriate. Next, we turn to adjusting the focus and stage calibration. For this, we click on the shortcut that looks like a gear wheel. A new window pops up. We pull this to the side and simultaneously increase the size of the live camera window by accessing the View drop-down menu found here. Why do I do this? Well, we are first going to adjust the focus. Although a live image is provided within the stage calibration window, this window is way too small in size to accurately judge where the focus plane of the ELISpot well is located. Therefore, we need a bigger live view window to help us find it. If you are looking at this tutorial in full screen mode 1080p, you should also be able to see the direct benefit of having this bigger window once I start fiddling with the focus settings. Focus is adjusted using the Z value located here within the stage calibration window. Small little buttons up and down allows the user to change the focus in real time. What I like to do here is get a feel for where the focus is located. That is, I start by lowering the Z value. I then quickly realize the focus becomes better. I then go further down, past the point of focus where it obviously becomes very fuzzy. I then stop and go back up again. Doing this back and forth will eventually give you a sense of where the focus is the best. Around the Z value of 8.4, I feel that focus is pretty good on our machine, much better than when we started off at 10.05. It is important to remember that these Z values can differ from machine to machine. Do not just take our value of 8.4 and copy it into your own AID reader. It is better that you yourselves try to find the optimal value by following the instructions presented in this tutorial. With the focus corrected, we quickly move over to fixing the stage calibration using the plate movement buttons located here, here, here and here. Stage calibration is done by adjusting the area of interest inside the three corner wells A1, A12 and H12. By positioning the AOI correctly right on top of the area for these three wells, the reader will then recalculate the position of all other wells found within the 96 well plate. To make it easier for the reader, it is good if each well is adjusted to the center of the stage calibration window before the AOI is finally put smack into place. This makes it easier for the reader to find the inner area during reading based on the auto center function. For final adjustments, the size and position of the AOI can be changed. However, this should only be done for fine-tuning, as seen in the video. We continue the stage calibration by putting the AOI smack into place for both A12 and H12. No rocket science here, just remember that the buttons moves the plate holder or stage and not the camera itself. With the focus and stage calibration done, we are now able to save it under any name we choose. For example, we could name it Mobtech MSIP or simply Mobtech. However, for this tutorial I'm going to show you another approach. By exchanging the currently existing stage.ini file, we switch out the default calibration that is automatically loaded every time the current user is logged in. That is, the next time Mobtech ELISpot user is accessed, this new stage calibration will get automatically loaded and I can immediately start reading my next MSIP plate without any adjustments. However, if your lab is working with different types of plate models, for example both MSIP and MIPS SW10, individual stage calibrations will have to be saved for each of these plate models. Thankfully, loading a saved stage calibration is very easy and can be done from the Tools drop-down menu. With the stage.ini calibration exchanged, we then hit OK to leave this menu. Let us again reread well C5 and check out the number of spots detected with both the focus and stage calibration corrected. Before it was 137 spots, now it is 212 spots. By double-clicking on the C5 well, we can then reach the well view. We have been in this section of the software before when the camera settings were totally off. Now with the camera settings optimized, let's give you a proper introduction to this area as well. The well view is dominated by the large image area to the left. Here you are able to see the details and quality of the spots much better compared to the default plate view. Above, you have a number of clickable buttons that gives you access to features such as removing artifacts, adjusting the position of the AOI, and showing you which spots have been counted. This last function actually has 3 different options in that counted spots can be indicated using either yellow crosses, blue circles, or colored dots. On the right hand side, we have the count setting thresholds that decides which spots are to be counted and which are not. The threshold settings are divided into 3 parts: intensity, size, and gradient. Each of these components can be configured for adhering to a minimum and/or maximum setting by using the tick boxes, and depending on the input, spots of different sizes will either be included or excluded from the overall spots numbers presented to us in the middle of the screen. Right now, the thresholds are configured for adhering to a minimum setting of 70, 50, 5. This means that any spots with an intensity of 69 and lower will not be counted. By contrast, there is no upper limit for how big and intense the spots can be and still not get counted. That is, when the tick boxes are left empty, the number on the right is made irrelevant. The 212 counted spots in this well can be indicated by pressing the button up here. Blue circles now highlight all spots that have been counted according to the current count settings. If we click on the button just below, we reach the Count Settings menu. This is an important part of the AID software, and any user of the AID reader should be familiar with it. At the top, we again find the threshold settings. Furthest down, we have the currently utilized algorithm. The AID software comes with 3 different algorithms called A, B, and C that all work in slightly different ways. Each algorithm is given an emphasis of either tiny, small, big, or huge, and depending on the combination you select, spots will get counted differently by the software. At Mobtech, we prefer algorithm C, but feel free to try out other alternatives. Using the mouse pointer, we can now go into the well and examine the counted spots a little bit more closely. By using the mouse pointer, we can get information on how a particular spot has been defined by the software. For example, this spot has not been counted since the information window background color is red. However, looking at the numbers, we can quickly understand why. With an intensity of 53, this spot falls below the minimum intensity value threshold currently set. We can also move the mouse to a neighboring spot that has indeed been included in the overall count. In this case, the background color of the information window is yellow. Right now, the count settings are far from optimal. We are missing a fair bit number of real spots by having the minimum settings for intensity, size, and gradient at 70, 50, 5. We can change this by going into the thresholds and altering the values to 20, 21. Now the software detects 345 spots in total, and just by looking at the blue circles, we can see that these settings are much more appropriate in counting this CEF stimulated well. Overall, I believe that the settings of 2021 Algorithm C, emphasis small, with the camera system in enzymatic optimized mode is a very good starting point. You seldom find yourself deeply dissatisfied with how many spots the reader has detected and what you can visually see with your own eyes. These settings are not perfect, but a very reasonable starting point for a majority of different ELISpot experiments. In addition to thresholds, algorithm, and emphasis, the count settings also include buttons called TNTC and count speed. TNTC is short for too numerous to count and is a slider setting put in by AID that defines the level of saturation in a well that is needed before spots become confluent and impossible to count. This concept is quite reasonable, especially in situations where results may primarily be handled as Excel sheets and there is a lack of human validation on the actual plate itself. For example, in large clinical trials where robots many times load and unload plates automatically. However, this setting can unfortunately also be put in too low, resulting in the machine defining TNTC in cases where spot numbers are actually not confluent. As a result, TNTC should be in my mind only be set at 80 to 90% and perhaps primarily be reserved for labs that do large automatic screenings. The count speed slider controls how meticulous the currently selected algorithm should be in the counting of spots. Switching to max quality will make the counting process take longer. Feel free to compare the difference by counting the same plate using different count speed settings. Finally, before we leave this menu, I would like to go through one last very important setting that is located here called invert recognition. With the reader configured for EliSpot reading, this tick box is in default left unchecked, meaning that the counting algorithm is looking for dark objects on a bright membrane, indicated by the black and white symbol located just to the right. This is how it should be configured for any EliSpot plate that you want to count. By contrast, if we check this tick box, the algorithm changes mode and is now looking for bright objects on a dark membrane. See how the symbol on the right has changed to a dark membrane with yellow spots instead. This setting is the suitable configuration for counting fluorescent spots in Fluorospot. However, in this tutorial, having this setting incorrectly checked will mean disaster for the spot count of our EliSpot plate. When hitting the apply button, spot numbers suddenly jump to 679 and the blue circles in the well become erratic and strange. Adding the yellow cross marks makes the craziness even more obvious. The scary thing is that the software does not warn us that this count setting mistake has transpired. It is up to ourselves to spot it. Take home message: make sure that you have this setting correctly set up for EliSpot by having the invert recognition option unchecked. I now hit save and the count setting menu closes. I then exit the well view to make it back to the default plate view. Tada! Configuration of our Mubtech EliSpot user profile is finally over. We are now ready to start analyzing the whole plate. However, before we do that, I would like to point out that under normal circumstances, this long process of setting up the machine is something we only have to go through once. The next time we load this user profile, all settings will already be configured accordingly and we can instantly start reading and counting our next EliSpot plate without any configuration steps. Okay, let's continue reading and counting the entire Intfon Gamma plate. First, I start by selecting the wells I want to capture using the left mouse button. I then right-click on the blue market area and select Read and Count. The wells are read from right to left and counted according to our configured count settings. We can now take a moment to reflect on the number of interferon gamma spots that were actually detected in this plate. PHA and anti-CD3 used in column 6 and 7 respectively have obviously generated the highest number of interferon gamma secreting cells, despite only incubating 1/5 of the cells used in the other parts of the plate. In column 5, the CD8 response against the CEF peptide pool is pretty strong. This donor has obviously been fighting off these common virus infections in the past and appears to have a good number of specific memory CD8 positive T cells in their peripheral blood. By contrast, the memory response against PPD involves much fewer antigen-specific T cells. However, since the increase in the number of spots is quite clear compared to the unstimulated controls in column 3, we do in fact have a significant response for this stimuli as well. Thankfully, the assay controls in column 2, where no cells were incubated, have generated 0 artifacts. This is a good thing. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the experiment and how our triplicates look. The pipetting work appears to have been adequate. Right now, our counted EliSpot plate has not been saved. We know this from looking in the upper left corner. See how it says Untitled? That is the default name put in by AID for any unsaved plate. Of course we need to change this. The process of saving is similar to that of Microsoft Word. First, we go to File and select Save As from the drop-down menu. Here we get to choose where we want to save our plate, and for this tutorial I'm going to place it right on top of the desktop. I put in a name, Mubtech Plate 1, and hit return. The software quickly acknowledges my command by changing the plate name in the default view from Untitled to Mubtech Plate 1.plt. The PLT thing is just a file ending that the software puts in there, nothing to worry about. Having saved my plate, I now want to export my data. AID has thankfully made this very easy using a built-in function found under the Data drop-down menu called Open in Excel. By selecting this, an Excel sheet is automatically opened by the AID software containing the spot numbers as they appear inside of the analyzed plate. Fantastic! This Excel file can now be saved and used for efficiently making graphs or statistical analysis on a separate office computer, without the need of using the PC connected to the reader. With our white Intfon Gamma EliSpot plate read, counted, saved and exported into Excel, we now switch to the clear EliSpot plate that has been prepared in parallel. To make this happen, we press the Eject shortcut button from inside of the AID software. The white plate is ejected and exchanged for the clear one instead. Back into the software, I now select a new template from the shortcut menu, select the C5 well for the reference check, right-click and select Read and Count selection. By just looking at the image in the C5 box, we can instantly recognize that the clear plate is much darker in brightness compared to the white plate. This is an effect that stems from the way light is reflected inside of the inner well wall. To compensate for this difference, I access the camera settings and increase shutter from 483 to 1012. Other than that, nothing else needs to be changed. Stage, focus, count settings are all the same as for the white MSIP plate analyzed earlier. I then just repeat the process of counting all analyzed wells. Due to the fact that I've increased the shutter setting, reading takes a bit longer as the camera lens needs to capture more light at each analyzed well. With the whole plate read and counted, I first clear my plate using the selection menu clear option, and then save my plate by going up to File, Save As. I again decide to save my plate right on top of the desktop as Mubtech Plate 2. Finally, I also export my results into Excel using the clever Open in Excel function. I now bring up my two Infragamma ELISpot plates side by simply making the windows a bit smaller. Here, the white plate is on the left and the clear plate is on the right. At this stage, I want to look closer at some of my results. I can do this either by clicking through each well view one by one and drawing conclusions based on what I see, or I can use a smart little function called Compare Wells that is accessible from the pop-up menu by right-clicking on two selected wells. In this example, I first select the C3 unstimulated control and well C5 in the white plate. Right-click and then select Compare Wells. Now an extra window appears with these two wells put side by side at greater resolution and with their overall spot numbers on the side. These comparison windows can be separately printed. By contrast, it is not possible to use the Compare Well function when using wells from different plates. As seen in the video, attempting this function does simply not work. However, we can get by this limitation by putting two simultaneous well views right next to each other. We first double-click on the C5 well in the Mubtech ELISpot Plate 1, and then double-click on the C5 well in Mubtech ELISpot Plate 2. There you go, C5 and C5, white plate on the left, clear plate on the right. Both look very nice and very consistent. Remember, both of these plates were pre-coded by Mubtech. The results actually come out looking this good. Now let's exit the AID software and let me show you what our saved folder looks like. Right on top of the desktop, two individual folders have been created with their names put in by us, Mubtech Plate 1 and Mubtech Plate 2. Let's drag these to the center of the screen. Herein, all data necessary for opening a saved plate from within the AID software can be found. The Mubtech Plate1.plt is a sort of master file. All the JPEGs are the captured images of wells taken by the camera system of the AID reader. Their names correspond to their plate location. These we can double-click on and look at using the default JPEG viewer from within Microsoft Windows. If any of these JPEGs were to be removed or deleted, the saved file would no longer contain that particular well. Thus, you should never remove anything or delete anything inside of these saved AID folders. Important to point out is that the full resolution of each image is here preserved. That is, this is the image material one should copy and use when creating, for example, a PowerPoint presentation or a figure for a publication. Let me show you how to do it. Open up Microsoft PowerPoint, go to Insert Picture, find the desktop, Mubtech Plate 1, and let's select the C5 well. There you go! Afterwards, we can add some relevant information that describes the image we are looking at. Mubtech YouTube tutorial. Well C5, 250,000 PBMCs, CEF 20 hours. That is it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this rather lengthy tutorial and that you have learned something useful today. If you have, please leave us a message in the comment section of this video or come to our homepage and write a follow-up question in our forum. There you will be able to interact directly with the people involved in making this tutorial. Bye bye.